On October 7th, terrorist soldiers from Hamas, Islamic Jihad, along with Palestinian civilians, breached the border of Israel and launched a brutal attack. Their attack was motivated by their genocidal desire to free Palestine from the river to the sea, that is, according to their own governmental charter and repeated statements, to replace the nation of Israel with an Islamist state and kill all Jews. To that end, they engaged in mass murder, rape, mutilation, beheading, burning, and kidnapping. They filmed their barbaric attacks to show the world. In addition to murdering 1,200 people on that day and taking hundreds of hostages, they gleefully engaged in some of the most horrific methods of torture, including ripping an unborn baby from its mother's belly and then murdering both mother and baby, raping girls to death using nails, bullets, and other weapons, baking a baby to death in an oven of the family's home, murdering the family, gang raping girls with such force that they broke their pelvises, raping girls in front of their families and friends, murdering children in front of their parents, murdering parents in front of their children, slicing off girls' breasts while raping them, and uploading video documenting murders to the Facebook page of one of the victims. Within hours, barbarity unleashed on October 7th on the people of Israel was evident in Israel and also across the world to anyone who had access to social media. Once the world witnessed this horror, I was certain that I would need to withdraw a proposal that I had made for a presentation that I was scheduled to give in January, and I had proposed to discuss why anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic. I assumed that once the world witnessed something that I already understood to be part of anti-Zionism, once the world witnessed this, there was nothing left to say. That there would be no purpose in giving a presentation trying to link anti-Zionism to anti-Semitism. I assumed that after October 7th, no academic would continue to support the from the river to the sea argument that Israel should not exist, and that others would distance themselves from those who seek to destroy Israel, because on October 7th, we saw very clearly in video the practical, real-life consequences of the anti-Zionist position. Modern Zionism is defined as the national movement for the return of the Jewish people to our homeland and the resumption of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. Since 1948, Zionism has been understood as the movement for the development of the state of Israel and the protection of the Jewish nation in Israel, just to give a kind of foundational definition of Zionism. Ending Zionism, being anti-Zionist, is not a thought experiment. It is a practical goal, and it looks exactly like October 7th. Anti-Zionism seeks the replacement of the single Jewish state with a 22nd Arab nation and a 51st Muslim majority state. Anti-Zionism seeks to complete the Arab-Muslim conquest of virtually the entire Middle East and subjugate or destroy all non-Muslim Arab tribes, including the tribe of Israel. The dismantling of Israel and the replacement of Israel with another country would not take place in a boardroom. It would not take place in some hypothetical dream. Israel already exists. Millions of people live from the river to the sea, and all the Jews of the Middle East, minus maybe 1,000, live from the river to the sea. It would take place exactly as it did on October 7th, with invaders brutally raping, murdering, and burning the final last Jews of the Middle East. I was naive. October 7th did not distance intellectuals from anti-Zionism. Instead, it energized them. Some applauded Hamas's attack and characterized brutal rapes and murders of women, girls, and babies as a valid form of resistance. Others blamed Israel for Hamas's misogynistic attacks, reasoning that brutal rapes and murders are the natural consequences of Israeli policies. Some clearly condemned Hamas's attacks, And then typically in the same sentence said something like, but Israel is a settler, colonialist, racist, apartheid, genocidal regime. So they kind of had it coming, and they have no right to respond. Calls for a ceasefire began before we even had an opportunity to identify or bury our dead. Apparently, my conclusion in sitting with this, apparently, many Western intellectuals, enlightened people, educated people, good people, believe that Zionism is such a heinous ideology, such a moral wrong, such an evil, that at some level, it justifies raping little girls because they are part of a Zionist entity. I don't know of another ideology that falls into that category. I can't recall a time when I have heard academics, professors, journalists, students rallying after brutal murders, beheadings, rapes, tortures, after a day like I cannot recall another time when otherwise enlightened people, social justice activists, have concluded that this is okay because something under this is so bad. I can't think of a situation where feminists and progressives responded to a day of rape, murder, and torture the way people responded to this day. And I also can't recall a scenario where there was such a misogynistic element to an attack, and feminists and women's groups across the world were absolutely silent, or worse, questioned the veracity of the testimony. As I sat with the painful realization, it occurred to me that in fact, I do know of an ideology that has been considered so vile, so wrong, so repugnant, that it justifies killing and raping people in response. In fact, this is not the first time this has happened to Jewish people, and it is such a prevalent part of our history that we have a name for it, and we call it blood libel. The term blood libel comes from the false charge that Jews kill Christian children and drain them of their blood to make our ritualistic Passover bread. This is a lie that would spread in European towns and cities, and in justified response, local Christians would invade a Jewish village and rape and murder people, burn synagogues down, mutilate people, do just kind of generally terrible things. These attacks became known as pogroms. The Kishinev pogrom of 1903 included the rape of 600 Jewish women. Like with other pogroms, the region's anti-Semitic intellectuals, including journalists, played a key role in stirring up animosity against the Jews, making sure the masses knew it was permissible, even desirable, to deal with the Jews harshly. Writer Chaim Nachman Bialy condemned the men of Kishinev for failing to protect their women. Do not fail to note in the dark corners of Kishinev, crouching husbands, bridegrooms, brothers peering through the cracks of their shelters, watching their wives, sisters, daughters writhing beneath their bestial defilers, suffocating in their own blood, their flesh portioned out. Broadly understood, a blood libel is a lie told about Jews to justify killing them. Blood libels also existed in the Muslim world. In 1910, the Jewish quarter of Shiraz, Iran, was pillaged and Jews were murdered in response to false accusations that they had murdered a Muslim girl. In 1941, during the Farhud, over 180 Jews were murdered in Baghdad and Basra by mobs screaming, "Eat Ba'al Yahud," slaughter the Jews. The Farhud also included scenes replayed on October 7th. Families barricaded themselves in their homes against bloodthirsty mobs. Women had their breasts cut off. many were raped, babies were dismembered. Jews have had a community in Hebron, which is today part of Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, since ancient times. We lived in Hebron under our own rule in ancient times, under the Hasmoneans, under the Romans, under the Ottomans, under the British. Today, there are still Jews in Hebron, but in 1929, there was an attack on the Jewish community of Hebron. The British were ruling the region at that time, and they discussed the attack as follows. About 9 o'clock on the morning of the 24th of August, Arabs in Hebron made a most ferocious attack on the Jewish ghetto and on isolated Jewish houses lying outside the crowded quarters of the town. More than 60 Jews, including many women and children, were murdered, and more than 50 were wounded. This savage attack, of which no condemnation could be too severe, was accompanied by wanton destruction and looting. Although pogroms in Muslim lands were not nearly as common as throughout Europe, they were frequent enough for Jews to be locked up at night for their own safety in Morocco and to build underground passageways in the Jewish quarter in Persia to avoid attack. Our communities in Egypt, Syria, Libya, Tunisia, Yemen, and other Arab and Muslim lands also faced pogroms throughout the centuries. For millennia, my people have been subject to brutal rape and murder because of the lies told about us. Today's anti-Zionist movement is aimed exclusively at spreading modern-day blood libels against us so as to justify killing us. I say exclusively because I want to totally distinguish it from a pro-Palestinian movement, which would look very different than anti-Zionism. I argue that it is because of the successful spread of anti-Zionist blood libels over the last 30 to 40 years throughout academia and in the Western world, that so many otherwise enlightened liberals were able to literally watch the brutal horrors of October 7th and conclude that either we deserve what happened to us, or even if we don't deserve it, we shouldn't defend them. We shouldn't defend ourselves, we shouldn't respond, we should just say, okay. Along with over 90% of Jews, I'm Zionist. Jewish Zionism is both a religious and political imperative. I am Zionist because I believe in the right of my people to self-rule in Israel, our indigenous homeland. I believe in our right to self-determination on the basis of both our deep spiritual and ancestral ties to the land, and also on the basis of our experiences over millennia as oppressed subjects under the rule of others. Zion means Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is the city of my people. Our time in Jerusalem dates back to ancient times around the year 1000 BCE. We established our capital in Jerusalem over 3,000 years ago. Despite what people may have heard elsewhere, we have lived in our land since then, earlier than any other people who exist today. Sometimes, as a direct result of massacres and forced expulsions, our numbers dwindled. But despite it all, there has been a Jewish presence, meaning Jewish people have lived in the land that today is Israel, uninterrupted for over 3,000 years. Our tie to the land continued even when we were in exile, meaning the Jews who fled. Our calendar, holidays, language, and practices have always remained tied to the land of Israel. The center of our spiritual existence is Jerusalem, where we pray by the outer wall of our ancient temples. When we pray outside of Jerusalem, we face Jerusalem. More than half of the 613 commandments that rule the lives of Jews can only be fulfilled in the land of Israel. I also believe that we should have self-determination in our land, not just because it's our land, but because we need it, because it hasn't worked out for us when we've lived in other places. And I believe that the best way for us to guarantee the survival of my ancient people is for us to have self-determination in our land. My personal family history feeds this belief. I have one. In every generation of my family that I know of, we have been physically attacked for being Jewish. Over 600 years ago, after expulsions from Jerusalem, I don't know exactly when, my family landed in Spain. For hundreds of years, We then left Spain during the Inquisition, and then for hundreds of years lived all across Europe, from as west as Spain to as east as Uzbekistan. We experienced pogroms, culminating in the worst pogrom of all, the Holocaust. My grandparents were all Holocaust survivors. After the Nazis and their collaborators killed virtually every member of my grandparents' family and every friend and member of their community, everyone they knew, they fled to Israel. In Israel, they reunited with cousins who had been there for generations prior. And I grew up with the stories of family members and loved ones being killed by Nazis, by the British, and by the Arabs. My mother's cousin was killed by a British soldier for no apparent reason. When my mother's family lived in Kfar Ganim, Arabs attacked the village and massacred a family in a house nearby, cutting up the bodies of the babies and pasting them to the wall as a warning to others to leave. My parents moved to America. Not so much for them, but my mother's mother couldn't take the stress of more war. They moved to America where ostensibly we would be safe. But on October 27th, our synagogue in Squirrel Hill was shot up. My sons and I were at synagogue the Saturday before for a bat mitzvah. We were not there on October 27th. My daughter was studying in Israel on that October 27th. And she thought the bar mitzvah was the day of the shooting, and when she couldn't get a hold of us, assumed that we had been involved in that. We were not, but we knew 4 of the people who were killed on October 27th. On October 7th, my daughter's base was attacked, as was her training base in Zikim, where several of her comrades were killed, where one of her friends was shot in the eye. Another of her friends' family's home was burned to the ground, and their neighbors were massacred at one of the kibbutz attacks. Another friend's 3 siblings and father were taken hostage into Gaza. My daughter, like virtually every Israeli and many Jews across the world, are personally connected to the people who have been attacked. My friend's son is still being held hostage in Gaza right now. In recent years, being Zionist, especially in academia, has become fraught. Somehow, my people's desire for self-determination has been mischaracterized as a racist and genocidal ideology. Anti-Zionists have actively pursued a plan with a ton of money from Middle Eastern countries to delegitimize Zionism in the eyes of the world, and unfortunately, they are having tremendous success. I want to note that anti-Zionism as an ideology existed well before the creation of the State of Israel, but that modern anti-Zionism is rooted primarily in 3 narratives. The first is that Israel is a settler colonialist project. The second is that Israel is a racist apartheid state. And the third is that Israel is a genocidal actor. As I will explain, all 3 charges are not just false, but actual inversions of truth. Meaning, the perpetrator says that the victim did what the perpetrator is doing to the victim. First, with regard to the claim that we are settler colonizers, I don't have time to trace the history of the people of Israel, but that history is very readily available through any basic Google search. Historical records, archaeological records, all support the fact that Jews are the indigenous people of Judea, which today is Israel. Indigenous is the opposite of colonizer. Colonizer is an outsider who comes in to steal the resources and oppress the indigenous population of a place. We are the original inhabitants in the land of Israel, and we survived many expulsions and massacres. Jews who live in Israel today are a combination of the few who never left, the 800,000 Jews who poured into Israel during the 1930s, 40s, and 50s from all the surrounding Muslim lands, who, upon understanding that that basically the Jews were also going to get a country, expelled all of their Jews or started massacring them. And then Jews who came from Europe, the survivors from the Holocaust, as well as Jews who have come from other diaspora countries throughout the time that Israel has existed. We're talking about a small group of people, by the way. Israel has about 10 million people, about 8 million are Jewish. Worldwide Jewry is what, 14 million today, 15 million, something like that. That's all the Jews in the world. So Israel now is home to half of the world's Jews, By contrast, Muslim claims to Middle Eastern lands begin in the year 610, 1600 years after the Jewish people settled Jerusalem, and their claims to the land of Israel come as a result of Arab conquests. During the Arab Islamic colonialization of the Middle East, Arabs, who are indigenous to the Arabian Peninsula only, conquered all of the Middle East and engaged in a process of forced Islamicization and Arabization. At its height, the Arabs' territory ranged from Iberia in the west to India in the east, and Muslim control spanned across Sicily, the Middle East, North Africa, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. The Jews are one among very few people who have been able to successfully resist Arab colonization. Many other tribes existed before, but were killed, enslaved, or forced to become Arab Muslims over the last 1,000 years. And the forced Arabization and Islamicization of Christians and other non-Muslims continues today across the Middle East and in many parts of Africa. That's indigeneity, settler colonialism. Second, claims of racism and apartheid have also been leveled at Zionists for decades. But there is nothing about Zionism that is anti-another people. Zionism is a pro-Jewish people movement. Zionism, as I mentioned the definition before, is the national movement for the return of the Jewish people to our homeland and the resumption of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. Zionism is not anti-Arab. It is not anti-Palestinian. It does not prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state alongside a peaceful Palestinian state, alongside a Jewish state. If anything, most Zionists agree that the best path we have towards security and safety is by having a peaceful Palestinian state next door to us. Far from being a racist apartheid regime, Israel protects the rights of all its minority inhabitants, including the rights of non-Jewish Arabs, Christians, Bedouins, other minorities, women, and children. By contrast, every other country in the Middle East and many in North Africa expelled or killed their Jewish inhabitants and other minorities over the last 100 years. While aside from Israel, today's Middle East is Jew-free, the process of killing and expelling all other minority groups continues in many Arab lands, as we have witnessed with recent conflicts and wars in Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Yemen. As a result of the expulsion of the Jews from the Middle Eastern countries, 800,000 Jews fled into Israel from the 1930s to 60s. Prior to that, while living in Muslim and Arab lands, we were second-class citizens, subjected to occasional massacres, other violent persecutions, experienced our children being stolen from us and placed with Muslim families. Today, there is almost no place in the Middle East that a Jew can live without promise of death. Meanwhile, unlike other Middle Eastern countries, Israel is home to many minorities, including Christians, Druze, Muslims, and Bedouins. As Israeli Arab Aya Najami explains, we live together here. Arab people and Jewish people, we work together. We go to the same places. 20% of Israel's population is non-Jewish Arabs. Israel has two Arab political parties. Arabs in Israel study in Israeli universities. They work in every profession in Israel, including as doctors and lawyers. Today, 43% of new medical licenses, that's for doctors, are being awarded to Arab and Druze doctors. 43%. They're only 20% of the population and 43% of new doctors. They are professors, tenured professors in Israeli universities. Arab justices serve on the Israeli Supreme Court. They are fighting for Israel against Hamas in this war. My daughter served with many non-Jewish Arab fighters in her unit. Third, genocide. Anti-Zionists have been claiming that Israel commits genocide since well before October 7th, since before a single soldier went into Gaza. It's been an ongoing claim that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians. The genocide claims are especially disturbing. South Africa has filed a petition at the International Court alleging that Israel is committing genocide. You can watch some of the proceedings online, you can read the briefs. There are especially disturbing claims, of course. Genocide is defined as the intent to destroy in whole or part a national, ethnic, religious, or racial group. And genocide is defined by both intention and action. You need both. Classic examples of genocide are the Holocaust, the Armenian genocide, the Rwandan genocide. Many people are killed in wars throughout the Middle East and the world. 1 million people were killed during the Iran-Iraq War, and over 600,000 Arabs were killed in the recent Syrian civil war. By deep contrast, in this war, by Hamas's own numbers, maximum 23,000 Palestinians have been killed. Israel reports that of those 23,000, approximately 8,000 are Hamas fighters. In May 2022, the United Nations released a report that 90% of casualties during wars are civilian. Civilians die during war. We know this, I think, intellectually. We've been really fortunate in the United States, having not had a war on this soil for a very long time. War is bad. It's bad. It's terrible. People die. Civilians die. Children die. It's horrific. Not all wars are genocide. In this war, for every combatant killed, for one combatant, the ratio is that 1.5 civilians are dying. And it's awful and it's tragic, and we wish that didn't happen. In a typical war in an urban environment, 9 civilians are killed for every one combatant. 9. That's average. In this war, 1.5. 6 times less than the average number that are killed in a regular war. Forget genocide, in a regular war. While the deaths of all innocent people are tragic, that innocent civilians are dying is not proof that Israel is committing genocide. Under these circumstances, where Israel is fighting a brutal enemy that intentionally embeds itself in a civilian population, an enemy that regularly misfires rockets aimed at Israel on its own population, an enemy that has blocked corridors established to help civilians flee the war zone, an enemy that is shooting at their own civilians when they are trying to get the food from the aid trucks that Israel is allowing in. When they are fighting against that enemy, the fact that there have been 23,000 deaths and a 1 to 1.5 combatant to civilian ratio, under no stretch of the imagination, could possibly be characterized as genocide. Moreover, Israel's treatment of Arabs both within Israel and outside of Israel, since its establishment as a state, also provides no evidence of genocidal intent or genocidal action. Since Israel became a state, the Arab population within Israel climbed from approximately 156,000 to over 2 million. Keeping in mind that there are no Jews left in a single Arab nation in the Middle East. There's 1,000 maybe in Iran or something like that. Very few Jews left in any of these places, 5 in Yemen, right? So we have been expelled or massacred out of every country, but we're the ones who are committing genocide and also a racist apartheid state. The population in Gaza increased from fewer than 400,000 in 1967, which is when Gaza became at all kind of occupied initially by Israel. Prior to that, it was occupied by Egypt, to 2 million, 400,000 to 2 million. Moreover, the standard of living for Arabs inside of Israel has risen across almost all indicators consistently. The charge of genocide that we're hearing today has been leveled against Israel since well before this war. It has nothing to do with this war. Anti-Zionists have been charging us. Thus, the three pillars on which the anti-Zionist movement is based, that Israel is a settler colonialist state, that Israel is a racist apartheid regime, and that Israel commits genocide, are all lies. Worse, they charge us with the crimes that have historically and continuously been committed against us. It is the Arab nations who are committed to racism and apartheid, where minorities, including Jews, have been killed, forced to convert, sold into slavery, otherwise oppressed or expelled. Women across the Middle East live without basic civil rights. Children also live without basic civil rights. Many Muslim Arab individuals or Persian individuals who also just want to be free live without basic civil rights. It's not just the minorities that are oppressed, it's also the people of these countries. And they are oppressed by fundamentalist Islam, by an Islamist ideology that is spreading across the Middle East incredibly rapidly. And we see it represented by Hamas, by Hezbollah, by Islamic Jihad, by ISIS, by Iran, by the Houthis, and by the Muslim Brotherhood, by all sorts of groups, some of which are actually in charge of countries, some of which are in charge of territories, and others of which are merely terrorist organizations that live among others in a country. These groups have the intention of committing a genocide that will kill the remaining Jews of the Middle East. They don't hide it at all, right? There's a saying, we use it when we're talking about personal relationships, use it usually. When someone tells you who they are, believe them. Maybe believe them. There is no limit to Hamas being clear, Islamic Jihad being clear, even the Palestinian Authority being very clear about having no interest in two states and no interest in a Jewish presence in their land. Thank you for being here today. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk to you about this. We can have a conversation. Any questions or anything that anyone wants to talk about? Yeah.
So I'm just curious. So because I was an international relations major in undergrad, so this is kind of the same sphere of the world I like to talk about. So I feel like something that kind of goes, that doesn't get talked about is how Egypt has even said, we don't want anyone coming to our country during this conflict because we do not know who is Hamas and who is not. How do you think, as people go about trying to have these conversations and go about presenting these topics that aren't getting discussed and like helping provide a fuller picture to these?
It's a big story, right? Like the history is long, and I talked for a long time, and it's like this much. So a lot of people don't even know like what the map looks like, and I should have had the map here. But basically, Gaza is a teeny tiny sliver of land, and it is on the Mediterranean Sea, and it borders Israel mostly, but the southern piece of Gaza is just a little strip. It borders Egypt, and there's a border from Egypt into Gaza, and there's a border, more than one border from Israel into Gaza. Egypt used to have that piece of land. They took it during the initial War of Independence, which is, by the way, the UN in 1947 said, hey, Jews live here, Arabs live here. Back then, there were no Palestinians yet. That wasn't a national identity that had even been formed. But there are Jews and there are Arabs who live in this land, and they should each have a piece of it. Transjordan was also a piece of this, which is today Jordan, which is, by the way, 70% Palestinian. There is a Palestinian state. It's ruled by a different group of people, but it's primarily Palestinian. All of this land is like, right, different people living on it, it's mixed up, and then you have all these borders. So with regard to this Egypt thing, like how do we teach everyone everything about anything? I mean, what I would first like to teach people is to stop having such certainty about things they know nothing about. That would be my ideal, starting point. Like, how about maybe you recognize that you don't know what you're talking about and you pause and study something and look into history and try and understand. This is a very hard history for everyone to be able to understand. Egypt has a border with Gaza. Of course, they should be opening up this border. Every time there's a war, when the war happened in Syria, the whole world opened its borders to the Syrians. There are Syrian refugees here in Pittsburgh, as there should be, because civilians should be allowed to flee war zones. Israel cannot allow the Palestinians in Gaza to flee into Israel. We saw that on October 7th. A lot of those people were civilians. No, thank you. It's the one country in the Middle East which absolutely under no circumstances can open the border and say, here, flee to us. We'll take care of you. No way. Egypt totally can. Why won't they? There's a lot of reasons. One is Egypt, during the Arab Spring, Muslim Brotherhood came to power. Muslim Brotherhood is originally an Egyptian organization that's Islamist. Hamas is an offshoot of Muslim Brotherhood. The president of Egypt, he destroyed that revolution. He's not interested in Muslim Brotherhood taking over Egypt. So the last thing that Egypt wants is Hamas coming into its borders, because they already have a rebellion problem with Islamists in their country, and they don't want more Hamasnikim coming in. The other thing is, and I think this is more insidious and more problematic and less about just pragmatic stuff that makes sense, I believe that the Arab world, like the broad Arab world, loves the Palestinian story. They're happy to sacrifice Palestinian civilians for a narrative that becomes so popular. It's really convenient. In the Arab world, it becomes popular because they teach their children to hate Jews. So like they've made up, they teach really these blood libels and all this crazy stuff like deeply in their schools and in their, so in the Arab world, instead of the people saying, why don't I have rights? Why don't I have enough money? Why do my leaders live in palaces? Why does my life suck? Oh, well, it's all about the Jews are killing the Palestinians. So that's what you should focus on. That's what you should worry about. And the same thing is true with the world. The world pays no attention. Nobody pays any attention to anything that goes on in the Middle East unless Israel does something. If Israel does something, everybody pays attention to it. And unfortunately, I think it's, deep-seated anti-Semitism that really feeds that. But the geopolitics of the region are incredibly significant. I think also the way in which liberal, and I'm liberal, I was liberal, the way in which liberal ideology has created this oppressor-oppressed dichotomy. When I was a kid, it wasn't called the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That phrase was never used when I was a kid. First of all, because there were no Palestinians. Second of all, because it was an Arab-Israeli conflict. It wasn't an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Even the order switched. It was the Arab-Israeli conflict because there were a whole slew of Arab nations that were regularly attacking this itty-bitty, teeny-tiny little Israel. And that was the battle. And then if you zoom out for a minute, you're like, oh, Israel is teeny-tiny. And the Arab nations all surrounding it are huge and powerful and wealthy. And so it's what has been sold and what has been bought is the idea that Israel, this itty-bitty country the size of New Jersey, at its widest point, if you don't have Judea attached to it, which is what is often referred to as the West Bank, its widest point would be 9 miles. Can you imagine a country 9 miles wide? Do you think that's a defensible border? Especially when all the people surrounding you are certain that they want to kill you. That's what it would be, 9 miles. Sorry. My answer was so much longer than your question. Yeah.
So genocide is not common in the world. We see it with Rwanda, the Uyghur Muslims in China, that we see in Ukraine now. And over the course of history, the United States has basically been on one side. We usually defend those that are being oppressed. But in this conflict, we see a divide in America, especially amongst people that are non-Muslims and non-Jews. So it's really what is your connection to it? Why do you think specifically in America we're so divided on this conflict compared to every other genocide or war crime?
Yeah. What do you think?
I don't know. Because to me, I see a lot of people protesting. It's you're not from the Middle East, you're not Jewish, you're not Muslim. So why are you taking side?
So it's been going on, right? It didn't start just now. It really ratcheted up. So I'm thinking back. I went to the March on Washington after Trump was elected. Okay. Today I wouldn't go to a women's march, which is so devastating to me. But I went to the March on Washington when Trump was elected with my kids, and felt like a lovely march. And then about 5 minutes later, as like new marches were being organized, there was like a dyke march being organized in Chicago. And I don't know, some Jewish people came with an Israeli flag and they were told they couldn't march. And this was like the beginning of this really obvious within these social justice circles of like, check your identity at the door kind of thing. Reality is, I wish we could all go to marches. In my perfect world, people can go as social justice activists to whatever march they go as and just go for that thing. I don't know why any one thing has to become everything. Arab women should be able to go to a women's march. They can wear whatever they want, whatever identifying thing they want, whatever it is. If it upsets me or bothers me or offends me, that's my problem, and vice versa. But like this idea that like somehow, so this was happening in these social justice circles for a while. And I think the social justice circles, academia, and students, like I think these are all the same. These are the same people. Like it's a very small group of people. Also, the reality is, I mean, I watch the news and I feel like crying every day, and I feel like, oh my God, they all hate us. They all hate us. They all hate us. And then somebody pulls me out of it for a minute, and they're like, relax. Like it's actually not everyone. It's only the people who are going to be tomorrow's leaders, but it's not everyone. You know, it is. It's like scary. You know, it's not. What is it? I mean, the easy answer is the anti-Zionism. I don't want that to be the answer. I don't like that answer. So what's the other answer? I think people, I mean, like when I see Queers for Palestine, right? Like that's so stupid. That's just stupid. You're just a stupid person. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. And so like, I don't know how much of this is you're just a dummy who doesn't know what you're doing, and you're just like going to a protest because protests are cool. Or it's like, oh my God, something, like I don't know. I like every day I change my mind. Like this is not real, this is not happening, nobody knows what they're talking about. And I see people interviewing people at these rallies. They ask them what river, what sea, nobody knows. I don't know, the Black Sea I heard recently. But dummies do bad things sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, and then when you have people who believe, that's the thing, does it matter that they're stupid? Probably not. Like, if people believe something, I don't know. Does anybody else have an answer to that question? What's the answer?
I'm not as knowledgeable as Professor Kaufman. I do have, in my home and in my family, the way that we discuss what's happened in America is that Hamas is extremely brilliant in their PR. If Israel was half as smart in PR, it might be going differently. But they're extremely brilliant in PR. And they spend a lot of money coming out of places like Qatar to induce Americans that don't exactly know. These protests you're seeing of people on the bridges, outside the airports, at the Rockefeller Christmas tree lighting, these are all people that were actually paid. And so all these people are getting paid from international sources to come and protest. And it's becoming a job. Do they know what they're protesting? Not necessarily. But if you feel strongly enough and you see what they are bringing, which is propaganda, and they're finding a lot of propaganda in Gaza. I have a friend who's posting daily. He's in Gaza, posting what they're finding. And those same source sheets are now being shown in America. And so they're providing source sheets of disgusting images that people are getting them, and then they're getting paid. And once you're getting paid to do something, you are going and you are spreading it. And it doesn't matter what the truth may be if you don't care to see the truth and believe it, especially when some of these people are actually getting paid to do this. It doesn't matter what the truth is. And then it continues to spread. And that's mostly what everyone is seeing, especially with these larger disruptive protests.
I mean, at a different level, like Al Jazeera is Qatar. All the Hamas leadership lives there. That's who lives in Qatar. This is not like a normal regime. The amount of money that some of these countries are pouring into American universities, we know that that's I mean, it's really, I had no idea. I had no idea until recently when you're seeing that in the news. It's very, I don't know about the protesters. I mean, I know a lot of people go to protests or really just go to protests, right? I always said that we should recruit law students at the protests. I'm like, protest, that does nothing. We should get law students from there. Yes.
So my question is, so everything that I learned in undergrad was that, in like the 1940s, when a lot of like them came back into Israel, a lot of Palestinians were expelled, like 700,000 or so. And you were stating that because of the oppression that the Jewish people have faced and the fact that you guys were there originally, that means that you have the right to be in Israel. So I wonder why it is that, just the oppression that you face means that you have the right to come in and push people out of the country that they were living in.
So we didn't push people out. They were living in. So if we go back to the 1940s, you have Jews and you have Arabs who are all living on this land. This land is being ruled by the British under mandatory Palestine. It also includes Jordan. It's a huge piece of land. You have Jews there, you have Arabs there. The Jews are indigenous to this land. Also, there are Jews who are going to be refugees from places. Arabs also have indigeneity claims to this land, and they are also on this land. The United Nations drew a partition. It partitioned the land, recognizing that you have two groups. One is an Arab group not distinct from all the other Arab countries in the region, so it's not a people. The Arabs are a people. There was nothing unique about the Palestinians vis-a-vis Arabs. What became unique is that they ended up as stateless people, starting in 1948 when Israel was created. And then there became a national identity because now they've been separated out from the Arab nation and they were alone in a very new dynamic, which I can explain. So 1947 happens. The UN says, wow, we have this land. We have two people. The British conveniently promised it to both people. They cut the land in half and they said, we're creating two countries, an Arab country, a Jewish country, and a third country, another Arab country, Jordan. The Jordanian Arabs are in no way distinct from the Arabs who were given the half of British mandate Palestine that they were given. As soon as Israel said, we accept, thank you. We adopted a Declaration of Independence, which is still Israel's Declaration of Independence, and in it, it very clearly states that all people here will have equal civil rights and everyone will be an equal citizen. We gave a hand to the Arab leadership and said, please be our partners in allowing us, for the first time in a long time, to rule ourselves in a region that we have been sharing since you guys got here. We agreed, they did not. The following day, Israel was attacked by 6 surrounding armies. The leader of Syria issued a statement, you can look it up, telling the Arabs inside of the land, we are going to kill all the Jews. This is where the sea language comes from. We are going to push them into the sea, get out of the way, and then you can come back after we win. Miraculously, without any explanation of how it's possible, because Israel didn't really have an army yet. It had its own kind of militias, just like the Arabs had militias. The Arabs and the Jews were both fighting against the British throughout the time that the British occupied the land. Same thing is true under the Ottomans. The Arabs and Jews were also fighting against the Ottomans, also fighting against each other, on and on. During that time, many Arabs who were inside of Israel fled. They fled to Gaza, they fled toward Jordan. There were massacres inside while this was going on. Arabs massacred Jews. Jews, I don't know how many. The stories of massacres are largely untrue, but I am sure that there were people killing people on the basis of being Arab or being Jewish that were going on. The entire town of Efrat, by the way, that is today in the West Bank, is essentially a suburb of Jerusalem. That was a village at the time. And when the partition happened, that village was too far away from other villages and they couldn't hold it. And so they sent all the women and children, just like the Arabs are sending their people out. This is what people do in war. In war, people flee. We also sent our people out of Efrat. We sent the women and children farther into the center. The men stayed, they fought, they lost. They were massacred. The West Bank got taken by Jordan. In 1967, when we got that land back, the children of those men, who were now in their 20s, went back and settled that settlement. They settled the land again, the same village that they were born in, that they had fled, and that they were massacred during. As far as the Arabs who fled, not all Arabs fled. 20% of Israel are the Arabs who stayed, and we didn't massacre them because they're there. They live in Israel. They are citizens of Israel. They serve in our armies. They are on our Supreme Court. Those are the Arabs who stayed. I am sure some fled because they feared for their lives. And many fled because Syria said, get out of the way. We're going to kill all the Jews, come back later. And it was a bad gamble. Like, they played that deal wrong. They ran away and we won. And we kept the land, and no, we did not let them back in. Also, all of the other Jews fled into Israel. So essentially what you had was a population transfer. 800,000 Jews from Arab lands fled into Israel, and whatever number of Arabs who were living in 1947 on that land, which I don't know what the number was. I don't think it was 700,000. I don't think there were nearly that many people on the land, period. But those people fled out of that land. We have had population transfers in many wars. The Greeks and the Turks have done this, where they just switch populations because it's problematic. So we're not there because we are, the Middle East as a whole, there are many tribes that have lived in the Middle East. The Arabs have killed off most of them. The Yazidi, there are almost no Christians left in Bethlehem. Bethlehem, when I was a kid, was very Christian. The Christian Arabs have all left because the Palestinian cause, which was once a national cause that included Christian Palestinians as well, has been overtaken by Islamists. And the Islamists have no interest in Christians being able to live in Bethlehem. So almost all of them have left. The Christians have left Lebanon. Over the years, we've always had students. Syria as well. Christians were also indigenous to the Middle East. Jesus was there, and then his followers, who eventually became Christian, and then there were Christians. Those people also were from there. Not the same as the Romans who came in, but also from there. All of these groups have been eradicated, and we have survived. We have survived all of these, and we're not leaving. And we also have nowhere else to go, which Golda Meir said was our secret weapon. So yes, there was population transfer. We didn't massacre everyone, and you can see that because of how many Arabs live in Israel and how well they do. They do better in Israel than in any other Arab country in the Middle East if you're not rich. It is the freest place to be an Arab in the Middle East. It's your religious freedom to be a woman. Domestic violence is illegal. Not in other not in other countries in the Middle East.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could comment on the connection between anti-Zionism and Soviet propaganda.
It's related, but it's not only Soviet propaganda related, meaning anti-Zionism, like other forms of anti-Semitism, it doesn't come only from one political viewpoint. Although it's also true that generally on the right is generally not anti-Zionist, right? Even right-leaning people who are anti-Semites are usually like, yeah, Jews, go to Israel. That's where you should be. So there are political distinctions. Within the Soviet Union, there was also a lot of anti-Zionist. The anti-Zionism, my understanding is really exploded in the 1960s. Specifically, that's when Jews who, after the Holocaust, survived the Holocaust and stayed in Europe, that's kind of when the last Jews left Europe, is when they had to get out because the anti-Israel propaganda was so strong. Israel was originally socialist. The people who started the government in Israel, they had socialist minds. So they were much more aligned politically with the Soviet Union, than with the United States, for example, which was capitalist all along. But they were being a democracy. So it was and initially there was support from the Soviet Union. And then it flipped. America really became allied with Israel. And the Soviet Union has become allied with Iran and with other kind of less free countries. What do you have to add on it? I assume that based on your question, like Protocols of Elders of Zion, or where are you coming from that?
Well, I was just, I mean, I've definitely seen, I remember it almost like the History Channel documentaries regarding like the, you know, the providers to the Arab countries and vice versa, the United States, and hence then you know, sort of have, well, let's sow discord within our enemies' population. What better way to sow discord than to, you know, how would I put this? I guess the term that I believe was coined by one of the Soviets was the useful idiots or useful fools.
I don't know it.
Anyways, yeah, I was just wondering if there was more.
I mean, there's a lot more in terms of also like that a lot of people would argue that the whole oppressor, persecuted dichotomy by which the whole world is supposed to be organized right now is the liberal ideology, that's totally based in Marxism. Those who are like pure Marxists would say like, no, that's not Marxism, that's some kind of corrupted version of something. And so I think that probably there's a version of anti-Zionism that is rooted in, I guess, communist ideology, but I don't know enough about it. Yeah.
So, and my family's from Lebanon, Syria, and we're Orthodox Christians who came to the United States. It's kind of cool that I didn't know that aspect of the whole part. So something you hear on social media is that, you know, there's always been some form of a state that's existed with Palestine. And you're like, I'm a Democrat, so I'm like, yeah, sure, let's have two states. But, even as like a Christian, I understand that the time of Jesus, it was called Judea. How do we bring those discussions into the forefront? Because it's like you're using religious context to show like, yes, there's always been a state, but it's changed names several times. But at the time, like there's the kingdom of David, there's the kingdom of Judah, the state under the Romans. So it's like, how do you talk about those without but keeping it civil enough where you can have those proper discussions?
Yeah, I think. I mean, a lot of people know enough about the Christian Bible that like there should be a little flag going off in their mind when like people are like Jesus was Palestinian, right? Like I'm hearing that and seeing that. Like, what do you mean Jesus was Palestinian? Like that doesn't make me Jesus was Jewish. I think everybody knows that generally. Palestine. So Palestine, it was not a nation of people or a state in the way that it is being used today, right? You see the name Syria, Palestina on old maps of the region. It's a name that was given to humiliate the Jews after they were conquered. Before there was a Muslim nation, like earlier. Of course, people lived in this area. You know, also like the population, this was not a livable area. We made it a livable area. This was not a livable piece of land, but it was a corridor, right? A really important corridor. The number of people, the area was very sparsely populated. Under the Ottomans, it became more populated. Under the British, population really surged. And this is where many Arabs from areas around it came because the British were there. The British were there, they established ports, there was trade, there were jobs, people are flooding in. And even then, still, the numbers are still, we're talking small numbers. Like when we talk about the fact that there's 10 million people there today, I mean, the population has exploded. This is not the way it was before. So when we're talking about like this land of Palestine, I mean, in modern times, it's known as Palestine under the British mandate. The people who are living there, there's Jews, there's Arabs. And to say Jews and Arabs is also weird because Jews were Arabs. Since the creation of the state of Israel, Jews have rid themselves of their Arab identities. We call them Mizrahi Jews. And when I say rid themselves, meaning they don't dress Arab anymore. They mostly don't speak Arabic anymore, even though they have a very different accent when they speak Hebrew, because they were Arabs for thousands of years. Since the Arab conquest, they were Arab. And so this thing about like, well, what's Palestine, who's Palestinian? There were Arabs that were part of the Arab nation that were indistinct from other Arabs of, for example, Lebanon, Syria. And within here, again, you've got Muslim Arabs, you have Orthodox Christians, you have Armenians, you have Druze, you have all these different ethnic groups. Those are each their own people. Arab was just like a larger, still is, it's a larger identifier of a giant group of people living under a certain type of regime. And so this piece of land, when like people are taught, like my aunt was born in Palestine. And she'll say, I'm Palestinian. You can see my birth certificate. I still have my old passport. I'm Palestinian. The Jews were Palestinian. I think the Arabs maybe also were Palestinian. I don't know. But like the soccer team of the Jews living in British Mandate Palestine, that was the Palestinian soccer team. The Palestinian Post was a Jewish newspaper. This confusion about like the land and who lived there, I don't know how to unpack it. I don't know what to do with it. Like, I think if people could kind of put aside for a minute, like, I don't know, their current worldly understandings and be like, okay, we're talking about a region of the world that has been conquered again and again and again and again by different groups of people, Babylonians, Romans, Persians, Turkish people, British. It's been conquered again and again and again and again. And during all that time, you have lots of populations who are living there who are different tribes. And the different tribes have different religions, and sometimes they have overlapping cultures. The Palestinians are the people who basically happen to be living on the land, who were Arab, both Christian and Muslim, basically not Jewish Arab. And then you had Jewish Palestinians. And when the land was partitioned and a war broke out as a result, when all the Arab nations attacked, then suddenly there was a group of people who were displaced. Because the people who fled out of what then became Israel, who ran into Gaza and ran to Jordan, Jordan and Gaza didn't take them. They didn't absorb them. They won that land. They put them in displaced person camps, refugee camps. And those camps are still there today. We didn't build the camps. We didn't create the camps. Jordan did, Egypt did, and we inherited them. Without wanting to inherit them either, by the way. The idea was to kind of broker land for peace, but every time we try and trade land for peace, nobody will give us peace. Because what they want is for us to leave or be dead, and for them to take all the land. If we could reach an agreement where we give them a little bit of our teeny tiny sliver of land and we can have peace, I think we would do that. Yeah.
Just one comment you're talking about, the label Palestinian. If one looks at in the 40s, any Western newspaper referring to the Palestinian people, it's always Jews. You won't see, in general, maybe a couple of exceptions, but in the vast majority, they'll talk about the Arabs and they'll talk about the Palestinians. But I think they're referring to the Jews in that area. So it's really kind of an interesting flip.
The Arabs were the Arabs. The Arabs are still the Arabs. So again, within the Arabs, you have all these distinct groups. When the Arabs are talking about the Arabs, they're not talking about groups so much. They're talking about today, about Muslim Arabs of a more fundamentalist persuasion. Thank you guys. I'm just going to thank before everyone rushes off the class, I know it's coming. If you have any more questions, please Professor Kaufman or email there. You can also always email me and I can pass them on, answer as best as I can. But we're really, really grateful to have so many people come to this Geopolitics event. And if you ever want to come to others, we like to have these. And if you want to hear them, I'd be happy to bring more speakers and have more of these conversations. So
if I could put in a little who wish to have a special campaign. We have a Point Park Friday night meal for Shabbat. We are having one right off of the campus in the